This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Hot Takes, the show where I listen to your hot takes and react to them in video format. We got a ton since the draft is just wrapped up. So let's jump into the first one. This is from Dog Pound, who says, personally, I wish the Browns fans would stop saying these players are bad. And the front office is clueless because they didn't pick their favorite players coming out of college. In my opinion, the Browns got really good ball players who also, from the first impression of them, seem like good people. Excited to see how day two goes. So this is a comment left on my recap of day one of the draft. In general, people tend to be very reactionary about the draft and about their opinions of the draft. The issue with being reactionary, I mean, like, it's an issue in general because people should tend to want to think a little bit more than just like straight up react to everything. But the issue with being super reactionary to the draft is, by the very nature of the draft, it is probably the most pointless thing to be reactionary to, because there is no instant gratification of either success or failure for a draft pick. You know, we're not going to see these guys play for about 5 months, and then even then, it'll just be their first season. You know, we're really not going to have a concrete opinion of who these players are until a couple of years from now. I always say this: look, I understand why draft grades are a thing. And I understand how people make those draft grades, and people are arguing about that topic right now on Twitter about whether you should draft or whether you should grade based on a consensus board. And I think there is nuance to it, right? Like, the consensus board does matter when you are trying to grade value, but also try to understand the thought process of the team and if that's coherent with what could be a successful strategy going forward. You know what I mean? Like, there's a great example, like Bo Nix not really fitting the consensus boards of where he should go. So you're going to give that pick a low grade when it first happens. But if we evaluate Sean Payton, and what he sees in Bo Nix, then that kind of changes how you feel about it, right? So there's what the consensus board says, what your own analysis and evaluation says, and then trying to understand the team part of it, right? You got to evaluate the process when it comes to evaluating a draft, which I always find to be important, because I could be right about a player, I could be wrong about a player. It happens. Evaluation is not a zero-sum game. You're not going to be right all the time. You're not even going to be right 50% of the time, right? Like, if you're really, really good, maybe 50% of the time. But most of the time, you're right, you're wrong. We'll see. But the process does matter. Does this make sense? Does it seem like this team had good intel about players, or does it seem like other NFL teams were constantly befuddled by what they were doing? Because that's an indicator of bad intel, right? It has to be more. The evaluation has to be more than did they take my favorite players or not, right? There are drafts that the Browns had where I walked out day one and I'm like, I like it, because they took all my favorite players. But then we see them try to have a plan for those players, and it's obvious that the plan is not going to be flattering for those players. The thing that I give Andrew Berry a ton of credit for is that not only does he draft players that, most of the time I like, but he has a plan for those players, so they have a better chance of developing and turning out to be something, which has been the case during Andrew Berry's run. Look, players have been developed under Andrew Berry's care. The roster isn't in a terrible place after 6 years with the team. Sure, they had their shortcomings on offense, but I think we're starting to understand where those shortcomings came from. And honestly, like, the fact that the defense isn't a mess right now, despite the fact that we did not have first-round picks and second-round picks for the last 3 years, is incredible, So, yeah, I like to factor all those things in when I look at a draft. What I think about, like, if they took a player I like, obviously that matters. But one good player ain't going to save a draft, right? Joe Bitonio was in that 2014 draft, but we all remember that 2014 draft is one of the worst drafts of all time. It takes usually about three to four players to say, hey, that draft was really good. So, yeah, also remember what you feel right now about the draft is the least informed you're ever going to be about that draft, right? You're like the draft works in a way where the opinion you have early is going to be the most visible opinion about the draft. But the opinion that matters the most is the opinion you have of this draft in 2-3 years from now. You know what I mean? The opinion you have on draft day, there's a lot that can affect that in the next few years. But the opinion you have over the next few years, that's going to be supported by a lot of information. So, it's always important to keep that in mind. Yeah, draft grades matter, but don't take your draft grades too seriously. You know what I mean? And I think that's been the issue, is that people kind of tend to take their draft grades in themselves in the process so seriously that they're not open to the idea of them being wrong, which by the nature of evaluations, you have to open yourself up to that idea of being wrong, no matter how good you are at it. Next one comes from Clips, who says this. Casey Concepcion, not the Kansas City Chiefs. Casey Concepcion actually has a 66.7% contested catch rate, the same as Lemon, better than Tyson, Cooper Jr., and other receivers in the draft. McMillan has 7 drops in the final season. You never know. One thing for certain, he's certainly a first-round talent. That's what's needed. Yeah, I mean, like when you look at Casey Concepcion's profile, it doesn't suggest that he can't catch. It's just for some reason he struggled to catch last year in some cases. So that's really what they have to figure out. Why is it that they think that he had these drop issues in 2025, and what do they think they can do to prescribe a solution to that? We're going to continue with more hot takes, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. Hey, let me talk to you about my sponsor for this year, PrizePicks. It's a fun way to win cash while you're watching your favorite teams. Forget complex betting rules. Their app is designed to be incredibly easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Speaking of, here are my picks for this upcoming NFL season. They have Myles Garrett at 14 sacks here. I think he will get more than 14 sacks. Joe Burrow at 3,875 passing yards. I think he'll be a 4,000-yard passer. I'm going to go with more. They have Derrick Henry at 1,224 yards. I'm going to go less than that. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You can follow me on the app at KWEN_C to see all of my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineups when you download the app using the link in the description. All right, this next hot take comes from Clay Daddy, who says, man, if you would have told me that Barry was not going to only spend 2 top 50 picks on wide receivers, but also he was going to take them back to back, I would have laughed in your face. I was over the moon and I was begging for one, or Boston in this draft, and he got them both and turned around and landed them. Yeah, like sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction, because if I would have mock draft the first 2 days of the draft for the Browns, if I would have had that in a mock draft, I would have been flooded with comments about how bad I am at my job, because clearly this would never happen. And maybe that's a lesson we all should learn, right? Whenever you see a mock draft and you think it's too pie in the sky or it's impossible, it's like, well, shit happens all the time in the draft, right? The Browns came like 3 picks away from literally getting into my dream scenario of getting Mekhi Lemon at 24. You know what I mean? And I remember when somebody put out a mock draft of like the Browns getting a left tackle and then Mekhi Lemon. I think the left tackle at the time was like Monroe Freeling, who they definitely could have got at 6. People just called it pie in the sky. Like I was like unrealistic for thinking that's a possibility. The draft is not necessarily a crapshoot. There are some things we know about each draft, but never underestimate the possibility that a player could fall in the draft, especially if that player is not like the number one pick of the draft. It happens every year. It surprises us every year. And then every year after that, we get in these mock draft machines. And then if something falls just a little bit too far from the consensus board, we act like on the internet that we should shun that possibility from even being thought about because it would never happen. But every year in the draft, shit that we think will never happen happens. Some of y'all did not think Shedeur was going to fall outside the first round. Some of y'all definitely didn't think that he was going to fall outside day 2. Browns end up getting him in the 5th round. If I would have put that in the mock last year, y'all would have called me crazy, right? Always be open to the idea like, hey, somebody could fall, something like that could happen. And maybe that's what I'm going to do next year is run more mock draft scenarios where I pick a top tier, a top 10 consensus board player and just drop him 30 spots below consensus and see what that does to a mock draft scenario. I think that would be fun. You know what I mean? And I wonder if that, I would assume NFL teams kind of prepare for the draft that way. So I'm going to pin that. Let me actually write that one down in my ideal book so I don't forget it next year. But I'm definitely going to do something to kind of simulate that next year in the mock drafts. Comes from Philip, who says, everything you said, Q plus the Browns acquired 2 additional 4th-round picks for next year, which is something not talked about enough in the context of the killer draft this year. This is something like, if you pay attention to how Andrew Berry manages the job, and I get into arguments about this whenever you run into the John Dorsey truthers and the truthers in the audience, because I make this point, and I'll make this point every day. John Dorsey's a great scout. John Dorsey is somebody that you would like to have in your scouting department, but he's a bad general manager. He is the equivalent of the defensive coordinators that are bad head coaches, but really good defensive coordinators, right? The Vic Fangios of the world, the Jim Schwartzes of the world. You wouldn't want them as your head coach because they run into certain problems when they're head coaches, but you do want them as defensive coordinators. They're great defensive coordinators, right? That's kind of where John Dorsey sits with me. He's a great scout. I don't think you could take it away from him. He has enough kind of wild hits in his career that you sound silly saying he's not a good scout. He's a great scout. He's just a bad general manager. And one of the things John Dorsey kept getting in trouble with was managing resources. He was always bad at it. It got him fired in Kansas City along with his issues with everybody in that front office, Andy Reid included. And then in Cleveland, it's part of why he got fired. He's just bad at managing resources, used a ton to get Odell Beckham. It didn't even fit the quarterback that he had. Kind of ended up being a mess there. That's what Dorsey's issues were. And Andrew, he's gotten much better at the draft. I think that kind of lines up with him getting better draft picks. And if you look at what he's done in the 2nd and 1st round, it's pretty good comparative to other GMs. But anyways, Andrew's drafts have gotten better, but where Andrew has always shined is his long-term planning and short-term planning, right? He's able to do stuff that makes us better right now while not completely sacrificing the long-term, but also prioritizing the long-term, right? We see this with the salary cap, where every year the Browns will be able to free up some salary cap, but they save some over to roll over into next year. It's intentional. They do this with draft picks where they always leave the draft with more picks in next year's draft than they came into it with. And that's because, again, it's part of Andrew's plans. Hey, I'm going to take care of right now, but we're also going to make sure if we have the opportunity to take care of ourselves in the future so that we're never really in a bind. And I think that's one of the brilliant things that Andrew Berry brings to the table, and why I think he is an effective general manager. So yeah, I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And I think, if the Browns can get to a point to where they can get this run game to a point to where it can carry the offense, and that lets quarterback dictate less about what this team can do win-loss wise, I think we're going to see the fruits of that labor. World War Z says this: the moment AB traded up for Emmanuel McNeil Warren, I knew he nailed the draft. Everything after was icing on the cake, and he ended up putting plenty of icing on the cake. Now, it's up to the coaches to assist these players to be successful. Agree, this season's quarterbacks will have zero excuses. Me, I'm a big fan of Denzel Boston, so somehow getting him in the second round was a steal. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren was an even bigger steal. The trade back from 6 was genius. This gave us the firepower to get Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. No trade back. It did, because we had the extra third-round pick, so we didn't really have to worry about losing a third-round pick to go get him. It might not never ever happen. Well done. AB, one thing that can't be dismissed about Taylor Green, hell of an athlete, 6'6", by the way. Watch AB grab some good UDFAs. Yeah, he's 6'6", 210 pounds, and he runs super fast. The athletic clay of mold for Taylor Green is pretty impressive. But yeah, I think getting 4 players that they have talked about being in the cards for round 1 in the first 2 days of the draft, I think that's going to be a success no matter what, especially when you didn't have to overpay for that, right? Like sometimes you'll see teams, they get like 3-4 first-round picks, but they end up having to give up a lot to have that opportunity. The Browns gave up nothing. They moved back, picked up an extra third, then they had the pick they had from last year from a trade back to get Casey Concepcion. So that's Spencer Fano, Casey Concepcion. They got those guys. Like, think about it like this. They got Casey Concepcion and Spencer Fano, not just at a discount, but at a profit already, right? They didn't spend anything to get those picks. They just got those picks from surplus, right? From other trades that they've made. So you get Spencer Fano and you get Casey Concepcion from that. You pick up Denzel Boston basically at cost with 39. That's your natural pick there. And then you can use the surplus that you still had from the first round to help you go up and take Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. And all it really cost you was like a couple of swaps, which you got back later on in the draft. That's good GMing. Okay? Like, it's not just that he got 4 players in the first 2 rounds that you had first round grades on. It's how he maneuvered the board to make that happen without costing this team anything. They didn't have to trade a future pick or anything significant to make that happen. They just kind of maneuvered it around. And I said before this draft, Andrew Berry's ability to maneuver this draft is going to be a testament to whether he's good at his job or bad at his job. Because last year was a lot easier. This year's a lot more difficult. I got to give him a lot of credit because I didn't think he was going to be able to make all these kind of trades happen. But he found a way to move up and down the board kind of at will when he wanted to and make things happen for himself, even when it wasn't going to be easy. So I got to give credit to AB for making that happen. Hopefully these players are as good as we hope they are going to be. But yeah, it's great to see. All right, now we're going to get into our making fun of the Pittsburgh Steelers portion of this video. So strap in. Funny man Luke, I don't know why I said Mike, says this. Also, imagine being Max in Anchor and hearing your team had no intention to draft you originally. It's a rough spot to be in. To know that you're the consolation prize. There's a documentary, a 30 for 30 back in the day, of the John Elway trade, I think it's like the 1986 draft. And they talked to Chris Hinton, who ended up kind of being Indianapolis's consolation prize in that whole fiasco, right? And if you don't know, John Elway, coming out of Stanford, he did not want to go to the Colts. He threatened to play for the New York Yankees instead of play for the Colts. Eventually, the draft comes around. The Colts draft him anyways. They go through a long period of arguing back and forth, what's going to happen here or there. And then the Colts end up trading him to Denver, where we all know John Elway played. And the big return that the Colts got for Elway was Chris Hinton, left tackle, who was drafted in that same draft. And Chris Hinton talks about it was like I was a good player, and he was a good player, but it was just weird always kind of being part of that shadow of that bigger pick in that bigger ordeal with John Elway. And that's kind of the situation with Max. It's not the same extent, obviously, but you're kind of like the enthusiasm that a team would usually have about a first round pick is not really there for him because they're kind of embarrassed that they had to pick him. Not because he's an embarrassing prospect, but because how they got to Max was extremely embarrassing. And this is something that the Steelers front office has already admitted. They're embarrassed by what happened, how Philadelphia basically did them. I mean, you could watch the video. Philadelphia, got on the phone with Mekhi Lemon while he was on the phone with Pittsburgh. He's on the phone with Omar Khan, and then he says, why Philly calling? Omar Khan is on the phone with him. And then he has to hang up and then talk to Philly. So even if you like Max a lot, his big moment is kind of stepped on because they were embarrassed to have to be in a situation to take him. That's a rough spot. That's a rough start. I like him. He has a great story, Max, and hopefully he works out. But what makes that pick funny isn't Max himself as a prospect, even though it's a little bit of a reach. But, a little bit of a reach in the late first, not the biggest deal in the world. It's one reflective of the Steelers' larger issues that this is their third tackle that they're drafting in the first round since 2023, which kind of speaks to a larger problem they have of filling that position. But two, it's not that Max Inananker is a bad prospect. It's that they put themselves in a position to be embarrassed to take him. And by the way, man, imagine if that happened to the Browns, how we would never hear the end of it. The worst YouTuber alive says this: if the Steelers didn't want to win a playoff game this year, it would be a decade since they've won one. It's hard to believe that, but it makes me smile. I hope the Browns win a playoff game again this year, purely to reset the clock on Pittsburgh too. Just to make sure that Pittsburgh stays at the bottom and it's not us who gives it up to them. Because Pittsburgh kind of opened up the floodgates to this because we would still have the longest playoff drought in the NFL if we didn't beat Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh ended that drought for us, and now they seem to be in the middle of a drought that they can't escape right now. All right, but that's the hot takes for today. Thank you guys for giving me these hot takes. Y'all have a great day. Have you better night. Peace.